So let's talk about the woke takeover of Good Morning Britain, because obviously this in Britain this is a big deal, right? Because this is the largest one of the largest breakfast shows, and it's a major fixture of like mainstream British life, and so it is important for this country. And Piers Morgan, being the sort of last bastion of patriotism just on British TV, is an embarrassment, of course, but it was unfortunately a necessary function that he fulfilled.
Apparently they get 32% of all morning viewers share.
There we go, 32%. And the obviously the main contender to that is the BBC breakfast programme, which is going to be woke because that's the BBC. And so Piers Morgan stormed out famously, although I didn't even think his storming out was even particularly ignoble. Like, I was hoping that it'd be, kind of ridiculous and he'd be shouting, and he was just like, no, not having this, I'm off. And it was like, okay, that was kind of dignified, actually.
So, like, I got better things to do than the weather, man. It wasn't, like, angry or anything. It was just, bored.
Yeah. I honestly was hoping it'd be an embarrassment because I'm not really a fan of Piers Morgan. But it wasn't. He actually held himself quite well. But he tweeted out, one goal I had when I joined Good Morning Britain was to beat BBC Breakfast in the ratings, and we did it on the last day. It was down to the hard work and dedication of the whole team. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks, guys. I'll miss you. And good for him. But he's like, they got the highest ratings, which is nice, and they won't be matched again, obviously, because Good Morning Britain is now going to go woke. Interestingly, they lost £200 million in market value, ITV, the channel that it's shown on, just because of that. The share price slumped by nearly 4%. So that's interesting, isn't it? Piers Morgan is worth £200 million in influence there. I just find that interesting. And that's not going to be recouped when Owen Jones joins the team, as he tweets out. Big news. Really delighted to announce that I'm joining the Good Morning Britain team. Really excited about to take on this new challenge. Tune in tomorrow morning. And of course, that was a lie. That's not really happening. He meant I'm joining as a guest at 8:15 to debate free speech. What did you all think? Ha ha ha, Owen. But the thing is, Owen, I really hope they do hire someone like Owen Jones to replace Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain.
Especially if he's going to talk about his views on free speech.
Yeah.
We've covered this before. On his own podcast, someone was openly saying the left needs to do what the right accuses them of, shut down free speech by cancelling people we don't like. And he just nodded along and then went, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's his view on free speech.
Yeah. He totally agrees with the most insane radicals that free speech is actually bad and should be opposed, which is why it's really interesting how, when asked about free speech, he actually tried to pretend he was in favour of it. Let's watch the first clip.
Free speech doesn't mean you have the right to a TV programme or to a newspaper column. It doesn't mean that you have the right to any form of public platform. Most people in the country don't have a public platform, and they still have the right to freedom of speech.
So the audio and the video seems to be misaligned, but that was how it was, because I was recording it from their website, I guess their playback or whatever, so there's nothing I can do about that. But notice that he's just there really kind of opposing a free society. If he's saying, well, I mean, you don't have a right to a platform, well, then what does that even mean? Like, you don't have a right to a TV show, why not? If you've been offered a TV show, you actually kind of do have a right to it, because it's being offered to you by whoever owns the TV station. And if a bunch of activists come along on Twitter and demand you to be taken down, then they are actually depriving you of the right to a platform that you otherwise have every right to.
And the reason for this is because Owen Jones believes in the Soviet Union definition of free speech, which is if you're allowed to think it, that's freedom.
Yes.
As soon as you exercise it to anyone else, that's not allowed.
And I love his definition. Well, I mean, you can go out in the street and say this thing. It's, oh, thanks, Owen. I appreciate that you're giving me this right to be able to just speak in the street. I would have liked to have talked to people on the internet. Is that not okay?
For these people, it's nothing about human rights. They don't believe in human rights. It's just about power.
Yes.
And they have a big stack of lies that they tell the public on a daily basis. And if you dare point that out in a significant way, well, that threatens their power base because it's built on lies.
Yes, it does.
So if you can only do it to two people or just yourself in a bedroom, no one cares.
Yeah.
But if you're able to threaten them on national TV, for example, then that's got to go.
Yeah, and which is why it was very interesting how, like, the next thing he says is basically, I hate Katie Hopkins. It's like, oh, and who the hell was talking about hate Katie Hopkins? Let's go for it.
When Katie Hopkins lost her job on LBC after what she said, because the right to free speech doesn't mean the right to freedom of speech without consequences, that wasn't an attack on her freedom of speech. She could carry on being as hateful and as nasty and bigoted as she wanted, and has continued to be, and hasn't been arrested for doing so.
Sounds disappointed there, doesn't he? She hasn't been arrested for doing so. But you would like it if she was, wouldn't you, Owen? That's the thing. You would actually like it if she was.
I mean, if she was murdered, he'd be happy.
Yeah.
I mean, just before we started the show, someone's tweeted that exact phrase, freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences, with just images of people murdered by Islamists.
Yeah.
Because that's what that phrase is a threat.
And it is exactly a threat. And the thing is, you would think Owen Jones, a man who has been beaten up for his political positions, which of course we don't support, don't attack anyone because they have an opinion, you would think that someone who has had consequences because of his freedom of speech would actually be against that argument, because it seems like he's kind of validating the people who beat him up. It's like, well, it's just consequences, isn't it? Whereas I actually do take the complete line that no, freedom of speech, the point of it does mean freedom from consequences, or at least, direct malicious vengeance being enacted upon you. That's actually what it's supposed to mean. So Owen Jones is just lying here and totally inverting the thing. But and then he's like, well, look, I should be able to, be as horrible as I want, and people are allowed to be offended. I mean, what's this?
I just think it's a very skewed debate because people portray it as the left being offended by others using their freedom of speech. But I get constantly bombarded by people on the right who are offended by me just expressing my opinions. If I start talking about, as I've said, British history, the British Empire, about the millions who died in famines in India under British rule, people get offended. They send me death threats and threats of violence. It's just a fact.
It's weird how he's barely able to stop himself from laughing about that, isn't it? Like, as soon as he can be like, well, they just get offended. The right of the snowflakes, ha ha ha. It's like, what are you laughing about? Aren't you genuinely worried about these death threats? I mean, you have been beaten up previously. So, like, if I were Owen Jones, I would genuinely be a bit more cautious about being so provocative if I thought that there were actually consequences for the things I was going to say like this, which I don't see why he wouldn't think that. But like you were saying, it's like, why do you have to? In fact, you weren't saying this. I was going to say this. Why, like the whole thing about like, oh well, millions of people starved in India. Yeah, it's because there was a drought. Like, it wasn't British policy to starve Indians. It was Soviet policy to starve kulaks. It was Chinese policy to starve peasants. And it's weird that the socialist is pointing to the British Empire and saying you're the bad guys, when in fact it's like, well, I mean,
on a record of famines.
It's weird that the socialists bring up famines and be like, yeah, so you've got a problem there.
Yeah, I'm in a position of strength here.
Okay. It's very, very weird. But yeah, I mean,
But I also just that ridiculousness there, where he's saying that what he sees is people complaining that the left gets offended by things. No one cares if the left are offended by things. What we care about is them demanding that you lose your position.
Yeah.
Them contacting your advertisers.
Yeah.
Like multiple organizations. What is it? We have Stop Funding Hate in the UK, Sleeping Giants in the US.
Yep.
They literally just try and steal money away from content creators they don't like.
Yeah.
That's not you being offended. That's you engaging in torturous interference.
Yeah, and that's being openly malevolent. That's trying to hurt someone because of their political opinions, which incidentally is what happened to you, Owen. So again, I'm surprised that you're in favour of such a thing, but I guess you just are. I mean, it's total hypocrisy. And I think that's what the smirk's about. I think that's what the fact that he's smiling about. He's like, look, I know that I have the whip hand here, right? Like, there's nothing you can say to me because I have identity politics defenses. I'm left wing. I'm therefore considered morally correct. And so I can sit here and advocate for immoral policies that when they are applied to me, like consequences, I deride on TV and I'm the victim. But if they apply to you, well, you shouldn't have opened your mouth. Like you said, it sounds like a threat, and I really dislike it. If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 PM UK time on lotuseaters.com.